Throughout Earth's Mightiest Heroes' short 2-season run, they did an absolutely wonderful job adapting not only the heroes of the Avengers, but their villains as well. When I had originally set out to talk about all of the heroes during both seasons 1 and 2, the villains had never really crossed my mind too much, but as I continued to watch the show and understand it more, I came to recognize that some of the villains are just as integral as the heroes that we see. And with that revelation, I've decided to cover some of the villains in this show. Shout out the Ultron video from a few months ago in 2024. And now I've come to realize that Amora the Enchantress has, quite honestly, one of the most sad villain endings in this entire show. And well, I can't really call her the most sympathetic villain or the most tragic villain. I feel like that moniker really should go to Wonder Man. I can definitely say that her ending is not exactly befitting of what anybody would deserve, except maybe Red Skull. Yeah, probably Red Skull. But before we get to that, it's important that we start at the beginning and not only understand what Amora the Enchantress was doing, but why she was doing it. Amora, from her first appearance on the show, has done nothing but be a trickster, specifically out to help Loki and further his plot of taking over the 9 realms via stealing Odin's powers. And she's doing all of this out of her own sense of love for Thor, her own want and desire for Thor, and the imagined life the two of them could have together, and she's simply using Loki and Loki's goal of domination over Asgard as a means to an end to get there, with the idea that Loki would take over Asgard and Thor would become completely available to her, essentially. And so that puts her at a unique role as a villain because she's going to be acting as Loki's right-hand woman and spends a majority of the series setting up all of his plots and plans. For example, she is shown to be slowly disassembling the Avengers throughout the early parts of the show, trying to fracture and split them up so that it's easier to take them on. She is also complicit and partly responsible for the breakout event that sets free nearly 300 separate villains that the Avengers spend a majority of the first season hunting after, and a small portion of the second season continuing to hunt for. But of course, breaking them out isn't nearly good enough, as Loki needs a distraction for the newly formed Avengers, something he didn't exactly see coming. So he gets Amora the Enchantress to recruit the Avengers' greatest villains out of the ones that were released in order to help keep them distracted. But just recruiting villains wasn't quite enough. She also decided to try and get her hands on magical powers that could quite literally destroy all of Earth, and herself included, it didn't exactly work out the best because, well, making deals with a man whose entire culture is quite literally dead from your people, not exactly the smartest move out there. But, you know, following Loki's ideas and plans, so it's kind of on her. And she does all of this out of her claimed love for Thor. We even see her form what would be the very first true threat the Avengers faced, with all of their greatest foes and villains that this show could get their hands on being assembled and used to fight the Avengers head on, and also pick them off one by one. I mean, it was kind of nasty. All this while Amora weirdly professes her love to Thor in like a very creepy, stalkerish way.
You, of course, have always been my heart's desire. We could leave Midgard and Asgard behind, and we could be together.
I say thee, nay.
What are you doing?
If there's one thing that I will say about this version of Amora the Enchantress, is that she is genuinely being sincere with her love for Thor. It feels like she's being sincere, at least every time we see her. And I say this because during one of the few pilot episodes, when the animation was slightly different, we get to see Amora the Enchantress not only express her almost dislike for lying to Thor, but also express the way in which she feels having to do everything that Loki is commanding her to do. It almost seems like her heart isn't fully in lying to Thor or doing all of these things behind his back. So unlike her comic book counterpart, I do truly feel that this affection on her end is because she believes that she does love Thor. And I'll say this, emotions are fickle and you can't really choose who you love, but Amora isn't exactly going about it the right way. I mean, just look at what she does when she finally gets her chance at having her hands on Thor. During the Ultron arc, as I'm going to call it, one of the final remaining Ultron bots had finally gone rogue, believing that the best way to protect humanity was to eliminate all of them. Humanity's greatest threat is itself. Ultron might have been onto something. But getting back on topic, during this entire event, Thor would unfortunately try to challenge Ultron and wind up appearing to be dead, at least to the rest of his Avengers compatriots. But thankfully for both me and the viewers, Thor was never really dead, but simply protected by Amora the Enchantress and teleported into Amora's own personal realm. And what does Amora do in this realm? Well, she definitely doesn't ask for consent. Can I say that on YouTube? Oh well. Amora gives Thor exactly what she believes he would want: a peaceful world, one filled with flowers, beautiful grass, and a place where the two of them could be alone together forever. One in which Thor would never face strife or hardships or anything of that nature, where everything would be perfect for the two of them. But Amora never really stopped to see if that's something Thor would even want. She quite literally keeps him there through a sort of mind control, almost like the lotus flowers from Percy Jackson. But of course, because Thor is Thor, this would eventually backfire. Even her strongest enchantments could not keep him down for too long, and he wants none of this. He has made it very clear multiple times that he does not love the Enchantress, he does not feel the same way, and the life that she wants for him, the one of avoiding responsibility, foregoing Asgard, and foregoing the mortal realm, is not something that he wants in the slightest.
Trying to save you, fool!
I do not want your help or your affection. But if you wish to fight me, I will oblige you.
Amora, quite literally, at least in this show's interpretation, suffers from something that we see, honestly, quite often in real life. And that's the idea of creating this perfect person in your mind. The perfect person for you and the perfect person that you would always want in your life. I believe this is called limerence, but if not, please fact check me in the comments. It's the idea that we project all of our wants and desires onto our crush or the person that we have fallen in love with and that we see as spending the rest of our lives with them. Yet instead of accepting the person for who they are, their wants, their needs, and their desires, we try to force our wants, our needs, and our desires onto them. I think Amora stands to be a fairly cautionary tale of this. She has quite literally thrown all morality to the wayside and any sense of being a decent person away for the idea that if she gets rid of the things that she believes are keeping Thor back from their relationship, that being Asgard, the mortal realm, and any sense of responsibility he has, she can have the version of him that she wants. But that's never going to happen because that version of Thor that she sees in her mind does not exist. Amora has to accept the fact that the Thor that exists right now is most likely the Thor that is going to exist for the remainder of their lifetimes, even though they are immortal as guardians. These ideals that Thor holds onto are probably not going to change, and she needs to accept the fact that that's who Thor is. Now, does accepting that fact mean putting yourself in a relationship with that person or a friendship with that person when your values don't align? No. It simply means accepting the person for who they are, and if you can be friends with them, be friends with them. If you think you can make it work, make it work. And if not, parting ways amicably or simply not talking to that person anymore. And that's something Amora fails at a fundamental level. This doesn't just apply to limerence, it also applies to how we view relationships a lot of the times in the real world. It's a lesson that I have definitely had to learn the hard way, and one that I've also seen play out more times than I can count, especially being as young as I am. It tends to happen a lot more with people around my age. Amora is also extraordinarily jealous of Jane Foster, the one person that actually has Thor's true affection, and she never really sits down and tries to figure out why Jane Foster has Thor's affection in the first place. Jane Foster firmly believes in not only helping others, but putting herself at risk to help those that need it. She does not have superpowers. She does not have any sort of extraordinary ability, other than plot armor, that would make her any different than the rest of us regular everyday people, yet she sticks her neck out on the line and risks her life in EMS every single day. That speaks volumes to Thor, a man who has had to learn what humility is like, what it means to be mortal, and why those things truly matter. He sees the life on Earth as not just fragile, but worth protecting and worth keeping safe and worth saving. And while he can recognize that he has the powers and he is a nigh-on immortal being and he doesn't have to worry about these things, Jane Foster doesn't. She is immortal. Her lifespan is short. She will die one day and could very easily die doing the thing that keeps other people safe. And that speaks volumes to Thor, that level of selflessness, something that Amora the Enchantress has been shown to not have, choosing one of the most selfish actions in trying to quite literally let Loki conquer the 9 realms, everyone else be damned, if it means that she could potentially have Thor. And if maybe she could have done some of this self-reflection, Amora could have avoided the situation that she unfortunately ends up in during the end of season 1 and a majority of season 2. And let's just say the rest of the first season does not exactly go well for Amora. Loki's plot gets completely foiled by the Avengers. I mean, dude actually gets wiped. Odin wakes up, reclaims his throne for Asgard, and completely blitzes them. Amora is essentially on the run, outcasted from her people in Asgard, and without any support from Loki. So she pretty much lost quite literally everything she had prior to this insane pursuit. And to make it all even worse, she has blown any feasible chance she ever could have had at getting Thor at all after pulling her little enchanting stunt. So now she has absolutely nothing left except to hurt the people that she believes helped in her betrayal, and that would be the group of villains she assembled to take down the Avengers. Yeah, Amora goes on a revenge tour that would make Liv Morgan blush. She quite literally is making every villain she previously teamed up with's life absolutely terrible, all to get back at everybody's favorite Captain America zealot, Baron Zemo. Simply because Baron Zemo betrayed her and planned to enslave Amora and turn her into his living weapon at the end of season 1 for his own personal gains. And, you know, that doesn't sit well with Amora, so she is quite literally hunting down all of the greatest villains the Avengers have had. Not that I would ever consider the Trapster a great villain. She honestly, it was like quite wild to see because they deal with some of these villains in very grotesque ways. Like, it's made pretty clear that a lot of these villains are dead. She at least wiped out like 3 or 4 of the big bads for a lot of these heroes. Just like wiped them off the map in a kid's show. And that's just not something I was expecting upon rewatching, but I guess the gloves were off when Man of Action took control or whatever. Now, of course, these villains do try to team up with the Avengers, but let's just say it doesn't really work out because Amora the Enchantress is absolutely busted. And Baron Zemo isn't exactly the smartest dude on the block, considering he decides to invoke Surtur, you know, the dude who's supposed to bring Ragnarok upon Asgard, and use that as his defense mechanism against Amora the Enchantress. Well, kind of effective, it's not exactly the most effective, because the dude is easily distractible. But ultimately, not only does Amora the Enchantress's plan fail, she ends up blowing up the Nordstone that is supposed to be connected to Surtur, one Loki didn't even dare use. And unfortunately, because of this, and because of Wonder Man, shout out Wonder Man, she is sent to Surtur's realm, which is a fate that I would only wish on very few people.
Amora the Enchantress.
Surtur. No. No.
You serve me now.
And the next time that we see Amora the Enchantress, she has essentially become like a herald of Surtur, kind of like a herald of Galactus, but she has quite literally zero control over not only her own mind, but her body as well. She's essentially a living passenger in her body as Surtur does whatever he feels like doing inside of her body, which has got to be extraordinarily scary and absolutely miserable. We see throughout the episode that she appears in, the last appearance of season 2, that is worth noting. She is not in control of her body and is probably living through a quite hellish experience. And all of this because she just so desperately had to have Thor.
Thor, please, help me.
And despite all of this, Thor still like seldom has sympathy for her, even though like it's made very clear throughout the episode that she's not really in control of her actions. But can I blame Thor? Not necessarily, because like it's obviously her fault, yet I wouldn't have wished this fate specifically on Amora, because I don't believe she was truly all bad. She clearly did love Thor and she clearly cared about him a lot, but just went about it in the worst possible way. Like the worst way you could ever go about it. And I don't think this punishment is necessarily befitting of the crime, but you know, some people might think otherwise, and that's cool. And all of this to set up a return to, you know, Asgard to start Ragnarok that will never happen because this show only had 2 seasons, and the second season felt extraordinarily like disjointed. So this is the last we see of Amora the Enchantress. Wait, there's another episode with her in it? Oh, cool. Does it, you know, further the Asgardian storyline? Does it further the Ragnarok? Does it keep the characterization? Oh, it's Powerless. So side note, I seldom talk about Powerless as an episode because it is so out of place. When Man of Action took over the creation of this show in season 2, a lot of things felt a little bit disjointed or completely out of place, and one of those things would 100% be this episode. For example, Amora the Enchantress is no longer showing any signs of being controlled by Surtur and is seemingly acting of her own free will and accord, and is completely fine with all the plans Surtur has in place. Now this does take place a fair few episodes after the previous one, so maybe she's on board now, but that doesn't really seem to make sense, nor really congeal with the storyline that was being told with Amora originally. As well, this entire episode doesn't make sense plot-wise. The whole thing is teaching Thor humility, which is something that he's kind of already learned at this point, and the whole idea is to get rid of the powers of the big 3, Thor, Iron Man, and Captain America, and have Hawkeye take over. But they don't really learn any lesson throughout this episode, nor does it necessarily make sense in the timeline. It also doesn't help that this episode aired originally, despite being in a production order previous. This episode aired after the finale of the show. So none of this makes sense. It's completely disjointed within the show. The character arcs don't make sense. Amora especially does not make sense from where we left her previously. And honestly, it's just not really a great look. I mean, fun episode. We get the Destroyer, we get the return of Loki for the first time this season and only time. Amora the Enchantress was cool, I guess, even if it's kind of fumbled in the execution department. But it doesn't really help my case nor further anything. And with all that being said, that's kind of like the end of the show. Amora does not get a resolution. She does not get a wrap up. She is stuck being attached to Surtur and essentially being his guide and his tool, his hand, for the rest of, I don't know, this universe existing. And it's honestly pretty sad, especially because her motivations weren't necessarily wrong. Like, she loved Thor, she loved him. I think that's very, very clear. Genuine love. But ultimately, it's the way in which she went about it. Not accepting Thor for who he was. Not looking at the grander picture and thinking about, oh, hey, you know, maybe I should love the dude for who he is and not try and change him completely to fit what I want out of the relationship. It was always about Amora herself. And she could have used some growing up, even though she's probably a couple millennia old, you know, because she's an immortal goddess. But oh well, lessons never learned. And I guess that's the end of that chapter. Really sad, honestly. I mean, despite fumbling at the goal line right at the end of the show, I felt like season 1 through about half of season 2 Amora was written very, very well. I felt like they added more complexity than her base, like, comic book love for Thor, which really seemed like, Thor's a tall, hot, smoky blonde with power. I want to be with him. This version of Amora at least truly cared about him and didn't really care about the power Thor carried, and more or less wanted him to leave behind Asgard and responsibilities to be with her, because she believed the two of them could live a happy life together away from everything. And honestly, it's kind of sad the position in which she ends up, which is a passenger in her own body and being forced to do things that she does not want to do despite the circumstances given. Now, does Powerless kind of tread back on that and make it seem as though she's more than willing to do this stuff? Yeah, hence the non-glowing red eyes. But I'm just gonna pretend that episode doesn't count, and it's just a fun, non-canon adventure. And that's the best part about comics. You can pretend what, you can just pick and choose what's real, what's canon, and what's not. Anyways, apologize for this video taking way longer than I had initially planned it to. Totally not recording this last bit the night before. Anyways, thank you all so much for watching. Okay, outro stuff time. If you want to like the video, please leave a like. It helps out the channel a lot. If you want to subscribe, that also helps out the channel a lot. And you can always unsub later. No harm, no foul. If you want to dislike, please leave a dislike. And then let me know down in the comments below why. Constructive criticism helps me to be a better content creator for all of you. And finally, I do run a Patreon in which you can just support me for $1 a month. As well, you'll gain access to the channel Discord. Not to mention the fact that you'll see each and every one of these videos early and completely unedited. As well, if you are in the $5 or above tier, you get shouted out at the end of each and every one of my videos, just like these lovely people here. So shout out Oscar, shout out Megan, shout out Frosty13, shout out Gabriel Lafonte, Transgers1, Video Gamer 75, shout out Golden Boy 420, Dakota Rawson, Donovan Gomez, and MC Bomb 27. You all are amazing. Hope you all have an absolutely fantastic day.